Welcome to this week's Pascal's China Lens. We're going to talk about whether Chinese are becoming lazy or not. And this has to do with a new term called Tangping. And I'm going to explain that in the context of the 996 crazy rat race of China, how it came about, what it means, but also what the pressure is that some of these kids have today, the Generation Z, and why some of them are bailing out and what that means for Chinese society. Are Chinese becoming lazy these days? Why am I saying this? Well, if you read a lot of news these days, the last 2 months, specifically the past month in June, many people have been talking about this term Tangping, and that means laying down, laying lazy, not wanting to be part of this rat race of China that's keeping going on. And so a lot of people, specifically young people, like early 20s, the Generation Z, they've just given up. And they just say, I don't want to be part of this. So what is this all about? We'll get to that in a minute. But let's first look at the work ethic of China. And many people, many Chinese, me as well, and many in the world will say China is probably the hardest working country in the world. I mean, if you see what they've realized, I mean, they've built these factories, they've built these cities, they've worked day and night to create the products we love so much in the West. I mean, biggest companies in the world as well, just in 20 years' time. I mean, this is really because of their hard work. But then other people, factory bosses, Western factory bosses, but even sometimes local factory bosses or people living in China will tell you, Chinese are not working that hard. If you go into the office, you see them often sleep at their desk. At the university, once they graduated and they're not doing that much anymore. Once they get into the job, they take long toilet breaks and sometimes they play games or do shopping in the office, or they claim to be in the office, but they're not. And so there's a lot of these terms happening that people are talking about. And in Chinese, there's the term nu li, which means work really hard. And then there's the term mo yu, which actually means to just touch the fish. And touch the fish means you just do as much or as little as needed for your boss so that he keeps happy, but you're not going to overdo it. So what is it? Which of these two worlds is actually the reality? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the context of China. And this is all to do with opportunity and with competition. And so for many people, you have to imagine 30 years ago, 750 million people living under extreme poverty, going to work in these factories or construction sites was the only way to get out of poverty. And so for hundreds of millions of people, this was really about working hard because they could do it for themselves and later for their kids. And they worked their ass off to make sure that their family and their future would be secured. And that is the driver of this hard working. But it's also to do with the competition internally. Last week was just the week of Gaokao, which is when 11 million Chinese tried their luck, or they tried to pass the exams called Gaokao, the most difficult exam in the world. And many will pass, but many also will fail. And this is the only moment in their lives for many of these children to get a different life. If they pass, regardless whether they come from a rich family or they come from the cities or the rural side, if they pass the exam, they can go to a good university, they can get a great job, and that is how their future is secured. And so this competition between these 11 million people, and that already starts like years before when they're at school to make sure that they can actually pass these exams. But then once they graduate, in the university, after university, finding a job is really hard. And many of the people today in China who graduate with a university, 22, 23-year-old, they cannot find a job. And so they become live streamers these days because there's no jobs to be given to them. So this is a real challenge. So a lot of people are starting to wonder, is this really worth it? But so far, this was the only way up for social mobility, and it has worked, and they've seen hundreds of millions of people get richer into the middle class. So a lot of people said, well, we just have to work hard, and that's the mentality. Now, if you get that job and you end up in a company like Alibaba or JD.com, the competitor of Alibaba, you're faced with what we call a 996 culture. And I've been part of this culture in China. I know everything about it. It means 9 a.m. you start your job, and that's when we open the office. And most people will stay until 9 p.m. and they'll do that 6 days every week. And when I was at JD just 2 years ago, 2019, I took this picture that you could see. And there's this big banner. This was during the shopping festival of JD. And the banner says, 不吃不睡不回家 是把对手全碾压. And what that means is very simple. Don't eat, don't sleep, don't go home. So stay in the office. You have to pledge, you have to swear that we will crush the competitors. And so this is interesting because this is really about this competition with Alibaba and this competition with other companies. And unless we work like crazy hours and work day and night, we're never going to make it. And this makes me think of a saying, a quote from Mario Andretti that once said, if everything seems under control, you're simply not just going fast enough. You're just not going fast enough. You have to go faster. And so the Chinese are working harder, not because they think this is great or they have to, it's part of their culture, but because this is a one-time opportunity to be the winner. And that is what they want to be. They want to be part of the winners. And so just 2 years ago, Jack Ma, who pledged this 996 and said, this is great because this is how China created these big tech giants and this is what we want. He got a lot of problems and challenges from netizens, specifically from engineers, telling him, we don't want to be part of this crazy rat race. But his idea was really saying, this is something typical for China. And in a way it is. And in Chinese, they call that Neijuan. And Neijuan means actually something very specifically. It means being part of that rat race. But what does it actually mean? I want to give a little bit an example. Let's say these three people working for Alibaba or Tencent or JD, Dave, Angela, and Amy. And Dave and Amy are working for Angela. Angela is the boss. And so both of them, they actually have to work like 6 p.m. That's the normal working hours. And at 6 p.m. they can both go home. But suddenly Amy feels she has to show to her boss that if she works until 7 p.m., she's actually really showing that she wants to do more and help the company and help her in doing so. And so Amy starts keeping to work, stays until 7 p.m. every single day. And so Dave is watching this and saying like, well, if Amy's doing this, then I have to do it because otherwise she's going to get the promotion and I might not. And so Dave starts working until 7 p.m. as well. And so the norm becomes 7 p.m. And then there's somebody new on the block, Jenny. First time in the office. And she sees that Dave and Amy are both working till 7 p.m. But nobody cares about her. Nobody notices her. So she's saying like, if I don't work until 8 p.m., I mean, I'm never going to get noticed. So she works until 8 p.m. What happens? Dave and Amy are also working until 8 p.m. And this is what's happening. It's this internal competition that if somebody starts being more part of this Neijuan, more part of this rat race, then the others have to follow, otherwise they lose the opportunity. And that is very much typical the working culture. You could call it a working ethic, but it's from the employee out. And that's why Jack Ma said, this is great because it's not the company, like many of us think, that forces these employees to do that. They force themselves because they're used to it through their childhood to actually compete with each other. Of course, some bosses take advantage of that, but that is the reality today. Now, the interesting thing is that there's a lot of pressure on Chinese. I mean, first of all, there's the work ethic, like companies want to compete, like JD, this don't eat, don't sleep, don't go home, just work really hard. And then there's also the internal competition, and these two combined create this Neijuan, this rat race. It's really about the companies wanting to be more and more and more and faster and faster and faster. And there's this window of opportunity they have to go, and if they don't get that window, a competitor will get it. And so JD.com, Alibaba, during these shopping festivals, most employees just sleep in the office because they feel if they don't do that, we're not going to hit our numbers. If we're not going to hit our numbers, then everybody's going to doubt if we're the right platform for the future. And that will influence my own future. And so this has to do with the company's future. It also has to do with the individual's future. And those two combined means that specifically people in their 30s, but also end of the 20s, millennials and people that are older than that, have actually this urge to really be part of this Neijuan. And there's this term called jiaolu. And jiaolu is actually this anxiousness. So they're very anxious to do this. They're like nervous, stressed all the time, like what's happening? Should we do more? Can we do more? And this is of course not very healthy. But on top of that, there's the family pressure. Because the family is saying like, yeah, you have to get this, pass this exam, you have to get a great job, you have to work really hard. And from child on, they learn that only by working hard, you will achieve something. And this is part of the culture of the Chinese country in itself, with what Xi Jinping calls the national rejuvenation, or this new rejuvenation of young people, that we have to get the country back, and the only way to do it is through working hard. And working hard is honorable. And so for both the country, the family, the companies, as well as the individual, they're very much stressed out because they have this opportunity, this moment in their life that they can really make it, and they want to do everything to optimize that. And that creates that rat race. So it's very internal. Now, how is that changing now? Well, today there's this big saying called Tangping, and Tangping means actually laying down and laying flat and just not doing anything and not care about this rat race. And if Amy and Dave and Angela and everybody's working till 9 p.m., you just say 5 p.m., I'm going home, I'm done. If they want to fire me, they can fire me, but I'm going to do my job, and maybe I'm going to touch some fishes to make sure that everybody feels or gets the impression that I'm going to do my job. And if I don't want the job, if I get fired, well, fine. I just go home, I lay down. And that's a very new thing with young people. So what is this? Where is this coming from? Well, actually, it's an evolution in time that has started because of this rat race, and the pandemic has a lot to do with it. And so it went from this rat race, this Neijuan, to an environment during the pandemic which was called Pujuan. This was, Pujuan means actually people that say, I don't want to be part of this rat race. I'm going to start playing games and I'm going to do just as much as I can. And yeah, let me just keep my job, but I'm not going to go crazy anymore. And then it went slowly into this term called Foxi. And Foxi means actually this from Fojiao, the Buddhism. It's like being Zen. It's like, I'm okay with change. And the pandemic was everything about change. But many Chinese are like saying, if life changes, I get a job, I don't get a job, I have to work hard, maybe today, but maybe tomorrow I do nothing, I go and travel. I'm very Zen, this is fine. I have no expectation on life so much, just go with the flow. And then finally, the term that we now talk about is all this Tangping, and this is really about just not wanting to work at all. But does it really mean that people are starting to become lazy? Are these Generation Z that are thinking about just laying down and laying flat and not working, not going to work, or work when they want, are they lazy people? Well, actually they're not. If you look at Tangping, you see these people, this young generation, what you see is that they're becoming the new freelancers of China. And they're deciding when they work, at their conditions, on their terms, whenever they want. And this is very interesting, because this is millions of people that are starting to go into more the creative spaces and want to, it's very good for innovation, very good for the future of China, because they're balancing their life and their work much better. And so this is something we see in the West as well. But for China, this is pretty new. I mean, there's been freelancers for a long time, but now it's really becoming a movement of freelancers. And then they're also more and more happy with the basic life. And that's to do with the fact that many of these kids, they're like early 20s, they're like saying, yeah, I don't have a really rich parents, dad or mom, and so I don't have the opportunities of the really rich, so I just have to work, but in a way, I'm rich enough not to have to work, so I can make that choice. And they eat noodles, they have a simple bed, a simple apartment, they're living alone very often, they're okay with it. It's not a big deal. And then they want to care about the health first. That's the most important. For them, healthcare, mental and physical health is very important. They want to eat healthy and so on. And so this is about work-life balance, but maybe they don't even have a work, but they want to have a balanced life. And this is very, very similar to where we are in many countries in the West. They just want to enjoy life. Ultimately, they want to have experiences, they want to learn, they want to educate themselves. And that is all great because that will fuel this creativity that China needs. Now, if you look at the society, not everybody's very happy with these people that are laying down or laying flat. Many are saying, netizens, like, yeah, but this is because they can afford it. It's these rich kids in the middle class. I mean, not extreme rich, because otherwise they would get money from their parents to start a company or get a referral for getting a job. No, they're not very rich, but rich enough to be able to not have to work. And so a lot of netizens call these people losers. So there's kind of like this internal tension happening. On top of that, the families, parents, who often work really hard, Generation X, the millennials, they work really hard to get there. And now these Generation Z, their children, are not wanting to work anymore. And so they're saying like, yeah, we did this for you. I mean, you have to work too. And how are you going to take care of us once we're old if you're not going to work hard? And so we bought you an apartment. I mean, come on, don't just sit there and do nothing. So that's another stress factor. On top of it, the government, of course, is not very happy, because with this whole new idea of this geopolitical environment where China now needs to take its chance in the next 10 years to show that they can become this very developed country like most of the Western developed countries and move up into this economy, they want people to work even harder. And Xi Jinping said it very clear. This is this national rejuvenation. And so government has actually been censoring a lot of this Tangping movement, as we call it very often in the West, because he doesn't like people talking about these things. So interesting that there's a lot of internal tensions happening. Now the world, when you look at these articles written by many of these magazines like Bloomberg and others, they're really talking about China is starting to become lazy. That was my title. And it's really about China's giving up. China's not part of that rat race anymore, because ultimately they've moved up in the economy and they're now just like everywhere else. They're starting to become a modern economy, and people don't want to work as hard anymore once they have a choice not to. And so the impression that many are giving in these Western media is that China's rat race, China hardworking, is actually going down. And I completely disagree when it comes to that. I actually think it's a great thing that is happening. But what does it really mean? China is not slowing down. It's not slowing down because there's a movement happening. There's a momentum for 30 years that you can't just stop. Let's not forget, there's still hundreds of millions of Chinese that still have to move up into the middle class. They still see that opportunity. But even in the lower middle class, they see the opportunity still to go higher as well. So there's only this gap, these people in the middle class that are not rich enough and not poor enough in the middle class that are saying, yeah, I'm young and I don't want to do it. So this is still a small portion of society. But does it change China? Definitely. Because we're talking about millions of young people. And they are changing China for the better, in my view. Because for them, it's really about this work-life balance. It's about making their own choices. It's about looking at the future for themselves and for everybody around it, not just do things because society tells them. And that means that now the change in China will have more and more people, which we call lazy in the West, in my view, will become creative. And they become more creative because they have more time, experiences, and ambition to do things out of their own. And this is exactly what China needs. And so I think it's interesting that this movement that we call it in the West, this Tangping movement about Chinese becoming lazy, in my view, is actually a good thing. But that's not how we see it always in the West. So I think this is changing China dramatically. And so we should look at what's happening with the millennials and the Generation Z today, because they want to improve China for the better. So when we hear these things like Tangping movement, it's like Chinese are giving up, they're becoming lazy, they're balancing life and work better and don't want to be part of this rat race. And so the impression that the world currently has more and more is that Chinese are bailing out, and they've become into a modern society, which means they don't want to be just doing what everybody else tells them. And maybe the competition will go away as well. And so maybe China's power will weaken. And these are the wrong conclusions, because this is not like yin-yang with a perfect balance and flower power. No, within the yin-yang, there is actually a phoenix and a dragon. And the phoenix is about reinventing yourself. This is all about creativity these days. And this is about resilience. And the dragon is still there. There's still hundreds of millions of people that are willing to work really, really hard. And so we shouldn't look at it as like a fluffy yin-yang situation where people are giving up, but rather a better balance between the creativity and the work. And I think that is why China is really going to transform completely in the years to come. Hope you liked it. See you next week for another episode on Pascal's China Lens.